This video is all about energy resources from the AQA Physics 1 exam paper. There are two types of energy resource, one of them is renewable and the other one non-renewable. Renewable can be described as replaceable. You can't say you can reuse it because once the bit of wind energy has gone, it's gone, but however you can replace it with more wind energy. Non-renewable can be described as finite. Once we've used up what we've got, we will not be able to replace it. It's finite. We'll start with biofuel. It's from a biological source, so for example, that means it grows or is continually produced. An example of this would be sewage. Although we often burn biofuels such as trees, it can be considered carbon neutral. The trees will absorb the carbon as they grow, and then when we burn them to release the energy, the carbon does then get released, but then more trees will grow and absorb the carbon dioxide. Nuclear energy is often seen as renewable. However, it is non-renewable. It takes energy from the nucleus of atoms. An example of the rock used for this is uranium or plutonium. So it's classed as a non-renewable energy source because once we've used up all the energy from the rocks of uranium and plutonium, we will not be able to replace it. We're able to harness energy because the nucleus is seen as unstable. It contains too much energy, and what we can do is make it absorb a neutron and it will split into two smaller nuclei. And as it does split into the two, it will release further neutrons, but it will also release a shed load of energy. And then just like in a normal coal, oil or gas power station, heat is generated that turns water into steam. This will then turn a turbine, and the turbine will turn a generator, which of course gives us our electricity. On to wind, and the wind turns a turbine, and you've probably seen quite a few of these in fields as you go along roads. However, sometimes there's no wind, and this of course means there's no power that's generated. So we might consider wind to be an unreliable energy resource. We can also harness energy from waves as well. Waves on the ocean cause the generator to move, and it's the bobbing up and down or this motion that generates the electricity. A problem with this though is that you need lots of cables that are connected from the generators back to the land, and this thing can affect habitats of marine life and also birds. Hydroelectricity involves moving water from a higher ground to a lower ground and going through turbines as the water falls. However, water will need to be collected in a massive reservoir that sits behind the dam waiting to be used. And then the gravitational potential energy of the water turns into kinetic energy as it goes down the hill, and that of course turns a turbine, which turns a generator. Tidal is often confused with wave, so let's look in more detail at the tidal energy resource. Water gets trapped after each high tide, and then the water gets released, turning turbines. The great thing about tidal energy is that it's predictable. We know that each day there will be two high tides and two low tides. But just like with wave energy, underwater cables are used, and that as well can also affect habitats of marine life. There are two different types of solar energy resource that you need to be aware of. Some solar panels rely on light and others rely on heat. The photovoltaic cells that rely on light absorb it and they can convert it into electricity. A drawback currently is that they're expensive to buy, but having said that, they then cost very little to run afterwards. You also need an awful lot of them to generate enough electricity for the consumers. They take up an awful lot of land, and they're also seen as unreliable because of course you need the light from the sun, and in the UK there isn't always very much of it. The ones that rely on heat are generally used to heat up water. This is then often used by people so that they can heat up their water for their hot water supply. When done on a much larger scale, you can turn the water to steam if you can get the water hot enough. This can then turn turbines, which then generate electricity. For this to happen, mirrors are used to concentrate the heat, and then they move with the sun and direct it to one common place, which then focuses in all of the energy from the sun. Geothermal is used in places like Iceland. Energy gets released by radioactive rocks deep within the earth, and on these plate boundaries it can heat water and turn it into steam or just hot water. So far, apart from nuclear, we focus on renewable energy. So now let's look at the other non-renewable energy, such as the fossil fuels. There are three types of fossil fuels: gas, oil and coal. Coal is seen as the most polluting because it gives off the most emissions, especially compared to oil, and then gas, which is the least. Gases such as sulfur dioxide lead to acid rain, and carbon dioxide gets released, which leads to climate change or global warming. There are some advantages and disadvantages to discuss about nuclear energy. A big advantage about the nuclear energy resource is it does not release the greenhouse gases that we mentioned previously. You also get much more energy released from it per kilogram than you do from fossil fuels. However, a large disadvantage is it does release radioactive waste, and it can remain dangerous for an awful long time, and it costs lots of money to store it safely. One way of offsetting the effects of carbon dioxide released from fossil fuels is through carbon capture and storage. One way of doing this in theory is to collect all of the carbon dioxide, put it in a vessel, and store it in a container away from the atmosphere. Many people want to stop using fossil fuels because of the disadvantages that they bring to the Earth's climate. However, non-renewable energy sources are really easy to get hold of, and they can be transported from place to place very, very quickly. They can also be used very easily to transfer energy into electricity, and it can be therefore seen as a reliable energy resource. The problem with renewable energy is we're not able to meet the world demand if we just focused on this and forgot all about non-renewable. To increase the world's demand on the renewable energy resource, more wind turbines are currently being built quite a lot, but the trouble is they look bad and people often think they're noisy. Finally then, let's just look at the idea of supply and demand. How much energy we need and how much energy we can get hold of changes, and we tend to use more energy in the winter. So to meet the supply and demand, we need a mixture of everything that's on this page. We can't rely on one individual source by itself. It's also worth mentioning that each type costs different amounts. And it's also worth saying that things like wind and solar are coming down in price and becoming more affordable as more people use them and buy in to the new technology. We're now at the end of the video, so thank you for watching. As ever, if you have any questions, please get back to me. And don't forget to subscribe by pressing the button that appears on the page anytime now. Thank you.